The Caribbean Sea, usually tranquil by night, suddenly transformed into a brutal battlefield. The Venezuelan fleet, like ships ravaged by fire and shot, burned fiercely under the lightning-fast assault of the American military. These warships, once the pride of the South American nation, were now merely sinking wrecks engulfed in flames. The image of desperate Venezuelan sailors leaping into the sea, clinging to pieces of driftwood, was a testament to the catastrophic defeat of their navy against a vastly superior American military force. In the sky, FA-18 fighter jets roared, dropping bombs like rain, while Tomahawk missiles tore through the atmosphere, turning the sea into a living hell. In the blink of an eye, over a third of the Venezuelan fleet vanished completely from the surface, leaving behind a heavy, haunting atmosphere. This event raised a significant question for the entire world. Was this merely a naval engagement, or was it the cold message President Donald Trump intended to send to Beijing, and indeed the globe? Would China, with its ambitions to expand its influence in the region, dare to intervene, or would it choose silence, accepting the loss of billions of dollars in military investments in Venezuela? All these questions and more will be answered in the program Military 247. Returning to the battle's unfolding events. After the main Venezuelan military bases were struck and destroyed by the United States within mere hours, the Caracas administration still refused to yield. President Maduro, in a reckless and seemingly desperate move, ordered the entire national fleet to sail into the Caribbean Sea. This was a risky decision, as Venezuela's navy was already outdated and obsolete. The fleet primarily comprised frigates and mini-submarines purchased from Russia decades ago, equipped with air defense, torpedoes, and radar systems that were long past their prime, no match for the world's most modern naval force, the American fleet. As soon as intelligence of the Venezuelan fleet's movement was received, American intelligence promptly informed President Trump. He immediately signed the order to launch Operation Fiery Storm, with the clear objective of annihilating the Venezuelan fleet at sea before it could pose any threat to strategic Caribbean shipping lanes. From naval bases in Guam and the supercarrier USS Ronald Reagan, FA-18E squadrons took flight. MQ-9 Reaper UAVs, silently soaring high above, guided Tomahawk cruise missiles launched from Arleigh Burke-class destroyers. The Caribbean sky suddenly lit up in an instant. The Tomahawks, with their incredible speed of nearly 900 km, locked onto satellite navigation signals and descended upon the Venezuelan frigates. Each warship, once the pride of the Venezuelan Navy, exploded into massive fireballs on the sea's surface. Within the first 10 minutes, over a third of the Venezuelan fleet was eliminated from the battle. Panic gripped the Venezuelan officers. They attempted to counterattack with old 125 Petrorov anti-aircraft missiles, inherited from the Soviet era. But not a single missile could reach the American aircraft. The FA-18E jets, with their advanced electronic jamming systems, leisurely dropped JDAM-guided bombs, shredding compartment after compartment, turning the frigates, once the pride of the Venezuelan Navy, into burning wrecks of steel, slowly sinking to the seabed. The U.S. didn't just attack from the air. They also mobilized an entire fleet of Virginia-class nuclear submarines to block any escape routes for the Venezuelan Navy. One Venezuelan mini-submarine, having just left port and not yet deployed, was hit by a U.S. Mk-48 torpedo right at its bow. The underwater explosion created a massive geyser, completely sinking the vessel to the ocean floor. The surviving Venezuelan sailors, desperately clinging to floating pieces of wood on the surface, awaited rescue. But in their eyes, fear was evident. This was not a battle, but a brutal execution. International military observers immediately analyzed the situation, pointing out that the U.S. didn't just aim to destroy the Venezuelan fleet, they also intended to send a strong warning message to the entire world. Any nation, regardless of support from Russia or China, that dared to challenge the United States in the Western Hemisphere would face a similar fate. This caused concern among Venezuela's allies, particularly Cuba and Nicaragua, who wondered if they were next on the list. From a tactical perspective, the American operation was considered exemplary. First, reconnaissance by UAVs, followed by cruise missile strikes, and finally, an air assault combined with torpedoes to eliminate the remaining forces. This was a multi-layered suppression strategy, a concept of modern warfare that only the U.S. Navy could execute flawlessly. Experts emphasize that this was not an evenly matched contest, but rather a real-world technology test, demonstrating the vast gap between the U.S. Navy and the rest of the world. A key point in this surprise attack was the role of President Donald Trump. He not only ordered the operation, but also demanded that it be carried out quickly, cleanly, and decisively. The goal was not just victory, but an overwhelming victory that would force the entire world to witness America's military might. And indeed, images of the burning Venezuelan fleet quickly spread across international media, sending shockwaves throughout Latin America. Some nations chose to remain silent observers, while others whispered in concern, if the U.S. could do this to Venezuela, they could do it anywhere. However, the biggest question remained unanswered. After the Venezuelan fleet was sunk, was this merely a short-term military maneuver or the beginning of a long-term strategy meticulously planned by President Trump? Because the true objective was likely not just Caracas, but the powers behind it, supporting the Maduro regime, particularly China and Russia, nations attempting to expand their influence in the Western Hemisphere. As the last embers on the Venezuelan wrecks faded, the Caribbean sky once again became calm, but the entire world began to ask, why was the battle so overwhelming, swift, and absolute? The answer lay in the advanced military technology possessed by the United States, a superior arsenal unmatched by any adversary in the world. International naval experts conducted detailed analyses of the surprise attack in the Caribbean. Every step, every strike by the U.S. was based on a highly optimized integrated technology system. First was the intelligence, reconnaissance, and surveillance system. The MQ-9 Reaper UAVs, flying at altitudes above 10,000 meters with continuous operational times exceeding 24 hours, not only tracked the Venezuelan fleet's movements, but also sent data directly to the command center on the USS Ronald Reagan. Every coordinate, every infrared image was updated in real time, ensuring that the Tomahawk missiles, upon launch, had a precise trajectory down to the meter, with no margin for error. Venezuela had absolutely no chance to react. The Tomahawk, a cruise missile that had become a symbol of American power, with a range exceeding 1,500 km and carrying a half-ton warhead of high explosives, could penetrate any low-altitude defense. Its guidance system, using military GPS, made the Tomahawk virtually invisible to Venezuela's outdated radar. When a Tomahawk approached, the Venezuelan radar screen would briefly show a small blip before disappearing in an explosion. That was the moment every Caracas naval officer understood they were facing an opponent of entirely different caliber. Following the cruise missile volleys, the U.S. Navy deployed squadrons of FA-18E Super Hornets, the backbone of the U.S. naval air power. These machines were optimized for both air combat and ground-sea attack, carrying JDAM guided bombs and AGM-84 Harpoon anti-ship missiles. Their active electronically scanned array, AESA radar, could detect targets hundreds of kilometers away. Meanwhile, Venezuelan warships were still using older radar systems, making it difficult to distinguish between real aircraft and the electronic decoys deployed by the U.S. The JDAM bombs, guided by satellite, plunged directly onto ship decks, destroying entire command and control systems. The Harpoon missiles flew just above the sea's surface, striking directly at the ship's flanks, creating devastating explosions. Within minutes, the ships that were once the pride of Venezuela had turned into sinking hulks beneath the Caribbean waves. The stark difference lay in the combat coordination capabilities. The U.S. did not rely on a single weapon type. They combined UAVs, Tomahawks, fighter jets, nuclear submarines, airborne early warning radars, and more. This was the multi-layered suppression strategy, a term that struck fear into every other navy. In contrast, Venezuela had only a fragmented force, lacking coordination and electronic warfare capabilities. Radio signals were jammed by the U.S., rendering many ships unable to communicate with their command. The Venezuelan Navy was essentially turned into static targets awaiting destruction. Another testament to technological superiority was the appearance of the Virginia-class nuclear submarines, the silent killers of the U.S. Navy. Their underwater stealth capabilities were nearly absolute, thanks to advanced acoustic baffling. Venezuelan submarines, mere mini-models supplied by Russia years ago, were incapable of detecting the enemy. When a Mk-48 torpedo approached, the entire crew could only hear a terrifying shriek before being engulfed in a massive geyser. This disparity was not just in military strength, but also in the technological level of weaponry, and that technology was solely possessed by the United States. Observers stressed that this was not merely a battle to eliminate the Venezuelan fleet, but also a demonstration of technological prowess for the entire world to witness. President Trump wanted to assert that America could strike anywhere, anytime, and the enemy would have no time to react. This created a powerful psychological effect. Cuba, Nicaragua, and even more distant nations like Iran and North Korea were forced to re-examine their own capabilities. Could they withstand a similar multi-layered coordinated attack? Meanwhile, in the U.S., media outlets continuously lauded the success of the operation. News reports affirmed it as clear evidence of the U.S. military superiority under President Trump. No longer were there prolonged, exhausting wars, but swift, precise, and overwhelming strikes. Images of burning Venezuelan warships were broadcast worldwide. The American people felt proud, while their allies in South America breathed a sigh of relief, understanding that Washington remained a secure anchor against any external ambitions. However, a noteworthy detail gave analysts pause. President Trump not only approved this operation, but also requested that the U.S. military publicly release images, videos, and data related to it. This was not just for transparency, but also for strategic deterrence. In other words, the U.S. wanted the whole world to see this technological dominance so that anyone considering a challenge would think twice. Yet a question lingered. Was Venezuela truly the primary target, or was it merely a sacrificed pawn? In the larger game Washington was playing, many experts believed the real objective was to send a message to Beijing and Moscow. Both China and Russia were attempting to expand their influence in the Western Hemisphere through allies like Venezuela. With the swift annihilation of the Venezuelan fleet, would Beijing still dare to establish bases or deploy warships right on America's doorstep? This would lead us to a significant turning point in the narrative, because after showcasing its technological prowess at sea, President Trump issued a direct order to the Pentagon to draft a firm message, targeting not only Caracas but also the powers behind it. Following the swift surprise attack that set the Venezuelan fleet ablaze in the Caribbean, the world awaited Washington's next move. Was this a single military strike, or the beginning of a larger strategy? The answer came shortly thereafter, when the White House issued an official dispatch. President Trump, in a stern tone, declared that the United States would not tolerate any power establishing fleets or military bases threatening the Western Hemisphere. If they did, they would be immediately annihilated. That message spread across the globe. It wasn't just aimed at Caracas, but directly at other capitals, Havana, Managua, and even Beijing. International political analysts interpreted this not just as a warning, but as a proactive strategy to reaffirm the Monroe Doctrine in a new era. Nearly 200 years prior, the United States had declared the Western Hemisphere as its undisputed sphere of influence. Now, under President Trump, that message was being reasserted with real firepower. In Washington, the Pentagon immediately convened an emergency session. Navy and Air Force generals reported directly to the president. They analyzed the situation. The Venezuelan fleet was out of action, and its ability to rebuild was very low. But the greater concern was that China had secretly supplied Caracas with radar equipment, coastal missile systems, and even military communication systems. Upon hearing this, President Trump immediately ordered the drafting of an official warning statement. The message had to be clear, unambiguous, so that the entire world understood America would not back down. The dispatch from Washington was sent with lightning speed. It appeared on all major U.S. media channels: CNN, Fox News, The Washington Post. The content was concise, but potent enough to shake the world. The Venezuelan Navy was sunk for violating regional security. Any nation that continued to abet such actions would be held responsible. The United States would act before the threat materialized. That last sentence was the crux. America would act first. This was an affirmation of the preemptive strike doctrine that President Trump intended to reinstate in U.S. defense policy. The American people followed the developments with elation. Many newspapers hailed President Trump as the reviver of the Monroe Doctrine. Former generals praised him for restoring decisiveness to the U.S. military. A wave of national pride surged, further solidifying his public image. Meanwhile, in Caracas, the Maduro regime descended into chaos. With no fleet and no bases left, Venezuela was virtually defenseless. Its reliance on China and Russia became starkly apparent. But at this moment, neither Beijing nor Moscow dared to speak out forcefully. President Trump understood that the initiative was in his hands. He didn't stop at declarations. He further instructed the Department of Defense to prepare for a series of joint exercises with regional allies. The goal was to demonstrate that America could not only act alone, but also had comprehensive support from strategic partners. This was a shrewd move, as it not only isolated Venezuela, but also made China and Russia understand that any intervention would face a broad alliance. But the story wasn't over yet. The dispatch from Washington had ushered in a new situation, where China's silence became the focus of attention. The world waited. Would Beijing continue to yield, or would it find a way to respond? After the firm dispatch from Washington, the entire world watched for Beijing's every reaction. Everyone awaited a response, a strong statement from China to defend its ally, Venezuela. But instead, Beijing chose silence. This silence was not accidental. It reflected a reality that China did not want, and could not yet, directly confront the United States in the Western Hemisphere. International observers called it strategic silence, but beneath it lay apprehension. China was already stretched thin in the South China Sea, the Taiwan Strait, and along its border with India. Opening another front right next to America would be tantamount to suicide, especially when President Trump had demonstrated his willingness to strike swiftly, cleanly, and without compromise. The question arose, why would China accept this humiliation? Because they understood that if they publicly objected, America would have a pretext to. The additional deployment of military forces to the region created a tense situation. A loud, showy display of power would only reveal a direct confrontation between the U.S. and China right in the Caribbean. Conversely, wise silence allowed Beijing to maintain a certain strategic space to continue its long-term, deeper calculations. Meanwhile, in Washington, the White House viewed China's silence as a strategic victory. President Donald Trump not only succeeded in neutralizing the Venezuelan fleet, but also forced Beijing to watch powerlessly, to silently witness its allies' pathetic defeat. This was a powerful, clear message echoing across the world. Any nation relying on China to confront the U.S. would face dire consequences. For America's allies, this event further solidified their unwavering faith in Washington's strength and protection. Colombia, Brazil, Mexico, and many other nations in the region publicly praised the U.S. action in ensuring regional security. The people of Latin America, who had always worried about China's growing influence, now clearly recognized the true force bringing stability and security to the region. On international media, images of destroyed Venezuelan warships became a compelling testament to America's overwhelming military might. Conversely, images of Chinese officials sitting in silence at press conferences became a symbol of helplessness and weakness. On one side, overwhelming power. On the other, complete impotence. U.S. military experts called this a silent war, a strategic chess match between Washington and Beijing, where victory was measured not only by the number of sunken ships, but also by the opponent's silence and helplessness. President Donald Trump clearly sees the advantage he held. In subsequent speeches, he repeatedly emphasized, "We do not seek war, but anyone who dares to challenge us will face consequences." This was not just a message for Latin America, but a warning to the entire world. In Europe, NATO allies listened and realized that the United States still maintained sufficient power to influence the situation on both sides of the Atlantic. In the Middle East, Iran and its allied militias began to show more caution and restraint. In Asia, nations surrounding the South China Sea became more aware of the difference between a U.S. ready to act decisively and a China remaining silent in the face of an obvious defeat. The Venezuela incident became a crucial strategic lesson, demonstrating that in the era of Donald Trump, America would not allow any threat to national security to develop. Washington would act preemptively, and it would do so with superior military technology. The brief military campaign, lasting only a few hours, showcased the overwhelming power of advanced weaponry, such as the F/A-18 Super Hornet multi-role fighter, the MQ-9 Reaper drone, and the Virginia-class nuclear submarines. The world realized that America did not need much time to defeat an adversary. The gap in military technology between the U.S. and other nations was undeniable, acknowledged by military experts in defense forums worldwide. After this event, many experts questioned whether China could learn anything from Venezuela's defeat. The answer seemed to be not much. Because the weapons Beijing supplied to Caracas were merely cheap, outdated defensive systems, utterly incapable of countering the true power of the U.S. military. And if one day China were to face the United States directly in the Pacific, would the outcome be much different? That was a question Beijing certainly didn't want to hear, but one it would have to answer for itself. While the world debated the developments in Venezuela, Donald Trump continued to capitalize on the opportunity to consolidate his power and position. He instructed the State Department to increase military aid packages for close allies. Colombia received an additional squadron of modern F-16 fighter jets. Brazil signed an agreement to purchase long-range early warning radar systems. Mexico received support to upgrade its air defense systems. Each of these moves not only enhanced the military strength of countries in the region, but also turned them into security satellites, crucial links in a U.S.-sponsored security network, forming a new security shield in the Caribbean, with Washington at its center. For China, this was a heavy blow. Billions of dollars invested in Venezuela, from oil to weapons, had now virtually vanished. But worse was the image of a patron, a partner that Beijing sought to build in the eyes of other nations, which had completely collapsed. Their ally was attacked, defeated, yet they could only watch in silence. Other nations would have to reconsider whether to rely on such a China, one that only provided weapons but dared not protect its ally in times of crisis. The dispatch from Washington, Beijing's silence, and America's overwhelming victory in the Caribbean combined to form a global strategic message. That message affirmed that the United States remained the sole superpower capable of acting decisively anywhere in the world. And under Donald Trump, that message was further powerfully reinforced. Americans felt proud of their nation's strength. Allies felt more secure than ever. Meanwhile, America's adversaries could not help but feel fear. However, the story did not end there. If Washington could act so decisively in Venezuela, no one could be sure they wouldn't do the same in the South China Sea or the Taiwan Strait. Donald Trump had established a clear red line. Any action threatening regional security protected by Washington would face a resolute response. This meant that other hotspots around the world could erupt at any moment. China's silence in the Caribbean might just be the beginning, because once America had demonstrated its overwhelming power, the question became, where would they choose their next flashpoint? And that is precisely what the world is watching for in Washington's and President Donald Trump's next moves. Thank you for following our analysis of this conflict. If you're passionate about geopolitics, military power, and the real events unfolding behind the scenes of the global battlefield, this is the place for you. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button for the latest updates.